Welcome back to 30 something, and if you are new here, welcome. I plan to post 1 to 2 times a week, so look out for new and hopefully improved videos as I learn this art of YouTube just a little more. Here on this channel, I share about my own personal finance, investing and life as a doctor in Australia. I aim to be as transparent as possible while remaining anonymous at the same time due to the nature of my job. I hope you enjoy the content, and if you do, please let me know down below via the like or subscribe button, or even leave me a comment. Firstly, I'd like to share a little bit about myself for those who are new here. I'm a 30-something-year-old doctor from Australia, as you might tell from my accent, who began having an interest in personal finance about a year ago. Since then, I've begun investing, paid off all consumer debt and saved over $10,000, which I think is a pretty big accomplishment after studying full-time for 8 years, and as you'll see in this video, not earning much until recently. I recently began this YouTube channel as a creative outlet beyond work and as a more interesting way to see the fruits of my hard work laid out in a fun little way. Today I wanted to review my incomes over the years since starting work in my teens. As you will see, I only have detailed income from my tax returns since 2010, but this is when more consistent work started anyways. Partly, this is to remind myself from where I've come from, and that it's okay I'm not in the best financial position yet. And also because I've never done this before, so it really has been eye-opening. I'll explain in more detail in the video to come. Firstly, a quick explanation, as I realise that not everyone who watches this will be familiar with the Australian tax system. The financial year in Australia goes from July 1st through to June 30th the following year. So when I say earned this amount in 2018, this means between the 1st of July 2017 and the 30th of June 2018. I've based all my numbers off my tax returns and was really surprised how little I lived off in some years. I'll provide some further details, including some of the impacts this had on my mental health and my drive to never go back there again, hence my plan to aim towards financial freedom. So starting around 2004, I got my first job in a warehouse where I sorted, stickered and processed books for an Australian-wide bookstore. I loved my job back then, and even though it was, in hindsight, was a pretty boring and repetitive job, I distinctly remember enjoying the challenge of being fast and looking at my stats at the end of the shift, as everything was logged electronically that we processed under our names. The people I worked with were fantastic as well. Unfortunately, this warehouse moved 45 minutes further away from where I lived, and without access by public transport because I didn't have a license at the time, I ended up transferring into the store section. Here I began stacking bookshelves first and eventually providing customer service. I distinctly remember being so challenged by this as I was incredibly and painfully shy at the time. A few years later, my family moved and I got a job at the local Kmart, but never really got that many shifts and didn't really like it, so eventually went and got my Certificate 3 in Aged Care and a gymnastics coaching certificate. This was probably one of the best decisions I made, as I was never really without work after that. I commenced full-time study in the second half of 2008 with a preparing for university course to get into my first degree, which was sport and exercise science, and in 2009 I began that. Yes, at the time I was working 3 jobs as well, which in hindsight was a little crazy. Now, in the 2009-2010 financial year, I had established jobs both in aged care and in community and residential care, as well as gymnastics coaching. I was also studying full-time throughout 2009. Early 2010 came as a bit of a shock when I ended up needing major surgery and ended up having to defer university and having 3 months off all 3 of my jobs. In a way, this was probably a blessing, as I was well and truly on my way to burnout already in my early 20s. Once I recovered from the surgery, I recommenced all of my jobs into the end of the financial year. I was on sickness government benefits for about 3 months of this financial year, which I can tell you is not really enough to live off. I earned a total of $23,299. 2011 was a better year financially. I did not end up going back to university this year, and I took another year off to do another course through the local church and do some self-development stuff. I resigned from 2 of my jobs during this year. The aged care job, I hated the environment I was working in. I ended up only working about 4 hours a fortnight by the time I quit. So one day I thought, why should I even bother? I still at that time had my community care work, which I did really enjoy a lot. The gymnastics coaching, even though I liked it, by this time I had moved 45 minutes away and only ever worked 2 hours at a time. It wasn't worth it anymore for me, and they paid really badly, and often they paid me really late. This year was probably one of the most I earned in a year other than when I started working full time, and that was at $35,357, but well below the average wage still. In 2012 financial year, I recommenced my first degree in sport and exercise science, still not really knowing what I wanted to do career-wise, and somewhat happy just plodding along, not really saving, but also not missing out on anything I wanted. Not that I was a particularly big spender anyways, although I am a bit more now that I'm working full-time. I commenced a job teaching gymnastics and tumbling at a circus school, which was a bit fun, and also for the first time actually took advantage of the government study allowance, which I was eligible for when I was studying earlier, but for some silly reason I just never really applied and worked my butt off instead. It was at a reduced amount as I was working, but a nice little bonus on top of that. In this financial year, I earned a total of $31,405. 2013 was more of the same as the previous year. Not much changed really. I worked hard at my degree and at work, and again earned in the early 30,000s with $31,017. 2014 was again the same, except I finished my undergrad degree this year and commenced my master's in clinical exercise physiology after deciding to get into postgraduate medicine and failing the entrance exam that year. More on that another time. I earned similar again with around $30,995. All these years I felt like I worked so much but really didn't earn that much in the scheme of things. Kind of crazy. At the beginning of 2015, I commenced my medical degree. Yep, passed that exam this time. I was then selected for interview after completing an application that looks at your GPA from your undergraduate degree, a portfolio of your past experiences, as well as your rural experience. I must have done okay because I ended up moving to the other side of the state to commence this degree. For 6 months of this financial year, I continued my community care job and circus coaching job. And then when I moved for medical school, I got a job for an agency working in nursing homes. I'm incredibly thankful that I was able to continue to get government support the whole way through my medical degree. I would not have been able to become a doctor otherwise, as my family isn't that well off and couldn't provide me with any financial support. I also randomly in this year worked for the Electoral Commission for one of the local elections, counting ballots. Never done it before or since, but fun anyways. Medical school is a lot more intense in its face-to-face learning as well as study requirements. My income dropped to $23,141 and continues to drop throughout this degree, as you will see in the coming slides. 2016 was more study. I continued the same jobs, picked up a little bit of group fitness class training to keep my knowledge of my previous degrees. This year I earned a tiny $18,450, which was stretching what I could actually live off. I didn't even have to pay any income tax this year. I earned so little. Little did I know of the year that was to come next. So the 2016-17 financial year was a doozy of a year. Yep, that's right. I earned a whopping $12,040. My rent was $9,000 of that, and I had a cheap rent sharing with 3 others. This year was probably the hardest year of my life. It highlighted to me how financial hardship really affects mental health. I have never been this low in my life. I was so stressed about life, university, money, and just about everything else that I was only sleeping about 3 to 4 hours a night for over 6 months of the year. I was literally going crazy and could no longer process my emotions rationally, all while trying to attend clinical placements that not only changed departments every 5 weeks, but often towns. And in doing that, I was away from my house, my housemates, my friends, and my family. This was also the year, on top of the 38 hours a week at the hospital, the exams were the hardest, and I studied about as much as I could outside of placement. After this year, I was burnt out. After bottling up my stress and anxiety, trying to keep it together for 12 months to just pass exams, I broke down. I literally cried from the minute my last exam finished for the next 5 days until I no longer had any tears left, and then I was just numb. I went home for my holidays to my parents' place and just laid on the couch for weeks. They tell me now that they were extremely worried about me. I found out I passed my exams at some point during all of this, and I didn't even have any emotions. I wasn't even happy or relieved. I was just numb. I ended up moving up to my rural placement after finding out I passed, which thankfully was back where I lived prior to medical school. Somehow I had emailed my old boss through this all, asking if I could have my old job back, and she said yes. Orientation, which they made me redo, even though I worked for them for 5 years prior, was still in my uni break, and this ended up working out perfectly. I was exhausted still, but the thought of being able to afford food was a massive relief. And here began the last stretch of my university life. 2018 was a much better year. I worked in my old community job. I worked pretty hard, probably too hard. I think my local clinical educator in the rural hub was worried about how much I was working, as I would do placement full-time hours Monday to Friday and then work another 16 hours on the weekend. The stress of no time was far less than the stress of no money, so I didn't really care at the time. I did eventually cut back as it wasn't sustainable, and work was really good with me and let me have weeks off prior to exams and assessments. This year, thankfully, my earning jumped back up, and this surprised me a lot, as I don't think I realised how much I was working. I earned a whopping $33,492. This was on top of literally spending 38 hours a week at uni placements, plus all the extra study on top of that. However, I was so much happier and less stressed, so it ended up being a good year. 2019, where I finally became a doctor. I earned $41,898, mostly in the last 6 months of the financial year, where I was employed full-time. Doctor wage, finally. It's been a long time coming. 2020, a year in the history books for everyone. Now I am well aware of the difficulties many faced in 2020, both financially and in their personal lives. Obviously, working in healthcare means that I didn't lose my job. Surprisingly, for a month or so though, my hours actually went down in the form of doing 0 overtime, as apparently when there's a pandemic on, people don't actually need to come to hospital as much. Figure. I went from doing about 5 to 10 hours overtime a week to sitting doing nothing while at work during the day. This is what every hospital in Australia observed in the early days of the pandemic, but that reasonably quickly went the opposite way, and the hospitals were busier than ever the second half of the year. My income was still above my base wage due to the loadings and overtime. This year it totaled $83,103. I remember this is all pre-tax, and I pay extra tax due to my HECS or HELP debt, aka student loans, for my degree, which is taken out as extra tax each pay. I can't wait to report on my 2021 financial year income. I've definitely earned more than last year to this point, thinking on track for 6 figures. However, my pay went down when I started my training program for general practice. So this first 6 months, my pay will actually be less than my last 6 months of work. And on top of that, I also don't work any overtime or weekends or after hours shifts. It may, as a result, dip because of that. It's also the first time I've earned a true passive income in the form of dividends, a whole $2.61 so far this year. I have earned bank interest in the past, but I didn't really track it, and I didn't really see it as income particularly now because it's so low. I am imagining my dividends this financial year will not even be double figures, but I'm still excited about the fact that I literally doing nothing for them. I'll do a 2021 update at the end of this financial year in July and look at all my income streams and what I've earned. So here's my income change in graphical form. As you can see, the gap between my income and taxable income increased lately, mostly due to salary packaging benefits. I lose these benefits in my training program, so this gap may reduce this year. Although I will have more expenses and deductibles such as college fees, courses and stationery, which could add up to thousands of dollars anyways. I look forward to continuing to plot this every year and watching this graph grow. That's it for this video. Hopefully it was insightful and interesting. Thank you for watching this far and if you made it here. If you do like the video, you're welcome to like it and subscribe. And if you have any helpful feedback, comment down below. Thanks again. See you in the next video.